Welcome to Chapter 3 of this masterclass discussion on compliance. My name is Brian Caplen, editor of The Banker. I'm here with Luc Meurant, who is head of banking markets and compliance services at Swift. And now we're going to look at the issues surrounding Know Your Customer. So Luc, we've talked about the whole sanctions issue, which was the first piece that Swift took on. What are the bigger challenges perhaps with getting around Know Your Customer?
Well, Know Your Customer is definitely a key issue those days, really important to all the banks. Challenges are different. Sanction screening is about checking transactions. Know Your Customer is really checking customers, but also you don't really know what you are looking for. So clearly there is no real obvious check.
So sanctions is much more specific because you've got regulations. It tells you where the sanctions are and who they're against.
Correct.
But Know Your Customer is the whole universe. It could be anybody.
It could be anybody. So it's a good point because basically we also decided to segment. We wanted to start with banks, but as you say, I mean, ultimately Know Your Customer, you need to do that on everybody. So banks, corporates, retail customers, ultimately, again, proportional.
So give us a bit of an idea of the scale of it then.
So in terms of scales, if we look at correspondent banking those days, basically you have 7,000 banks involved in correspondent banking, so the scale is contained. But to give you an idea of the efficiency, 7,000 banks involved in global banking, in correspondent banking, 1.3 million relationships between those banks. Yeah. So clearly from an efficiency you can see.
So you have to multiply 7,000 by 1.3 million, is that right?
Well,
actually, to get to the...
Well, the way to look at that is that those 7,000 banks between themselves, they generate 1.3 million relationships. So if you replace the current bilateral exchange of information between those banks by a central kind of registry, instead of having 1.3 million exchanges of information, you only have 7,000, that's it, with a central registry that sits in the middle. So much more efficient, and also because everything is centralized, you can invest a bit more in quality, and therefore that impacts effectiveness as well.
Okay, but what are the banks telling you about it at the moment? I mean, how worried are they, and what are they trying to do for themselves?
Well, they are clearly worried. I mean, there have been a number of public examples of things that went wrong, and therefore what you see today is banks de-risking, so getting rid of a number of their relationships. So clearly they want to make sure that those customers that they retain are good customers. And of course, what is the definition of a good customer? And that is different bank by bank. But to me, the key point is that what is key is to provide each bank with enough information so that they can take an educated decision on whether that customer is of an acceptable level of risk to them or not. All
right, but it's a big responsibility, isn't it? Because again, I mean, if you tell a bank, you know, that this customer is not desirable in some ways, and you get it wrong, absolutely, that's lost business.
Yeah. And let's be clear on that. I think Swift will never be in the business of saying that a customer is good and a customer is bad. What we really want to do is to collect the necessary information so that banks can make their own risk assessments. And actually that point is valid across everything that Swift does. There should be no expectation that liabilities are going to shift from banks to a third party like Swift. I think regulators made it very clear that banks are liable for their decisions, and third parties can help in terms of data collection or services, etc.
But the responsibility still stays with the bank.
Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
All right, so now where has Swift got to so far in the process?
So we started the development of that solution a couple of months ago. So initially we started with a group of 6 large banks that were designing the service with us. At this stage, we have already 11 banks that are designing and another 25 banks that want to contribute. So clearly the momentum is extremely strong. And I think the reason for that success is that we basically decided on purpose to contain the scope of what we do to correspondent banking, which is a field that Swift knows extremely well, and therefore we are the natural owner of that field.
Because you can imagine, I mean, if it gets out into other areas of banking, it's just fast.
It's huge.
So when do you think you'll be able to roll it out for correspondent banking?
December this year is it's going to be live, and actually we'll start even over the summer to start populating that registry. So it's going to be even faster than that.
Okay. And how much do you think the regulations are going to sort of keep changing on the KYC front? And also, I mean, it's a big challenge, isn't it, to bring in regulatory environments from different jurisdictions, to sort of have China and Russia in the same utility?
Yeah, fortunately, there is some consistency in the kind of regulatory context for Know Your Customer, but you are right, there are always kind of differences. Also, you do face some issues in terms of data storage of the information. Some countries prevent you from getting the data stored elsewhere than in the country, so you need to accommodate with this. But so far what we have seen is that for the vast majority of countries we can actually accommodate a central service. And what we will do is year after year we'll keep evolving the kind of the richness of the information that we will provide through the service to cater for the needs.
Okay. And so how do you source the data then that goes into the system?
Well, we call it a user-provided, user-controlled model, and that's a fundamental kind of aspect of the service. So basically, we'll ask the banks to contribute the data themselves. And in exchange of that, they will be able to control who can get access to that information under our own security kind of mechanism. And this is important because basically then banks will feel fairly comfortable to provide more information if they know that they can actually control who can get access to that information. So user-provided, user-controlled, that's a key principle that we push forward.
Okay. All right, we look forward to seeing that service come online, and we'll be back in a moment to talk about what other things that Swift can provide.
Very good.